Yay. Thank you so much for being here. So I absolutely love working with Bruce. We have been working together, co-teaching in some capacity for the last few years. And I feel like we're the yin yang, we're the east west, we're the, and we both really honor and respect each other's past, our lineages, and know and see that both destinies go to the same place. So my own personal background with Reiki is contrast. I was taught level 1 and 2 in Alaska while I was training at a birth center, and it was, quote unquote, Usui Reiki, which was totally fine. I studied out of Diane Stein's Essential Reiki book, and this was back in 2002. It's not like we had, even William Lee's manuals didn't have as much content as it does today. So like I was kind of just, here, read this manual, take this couple-hour class, here you go. And so I did my level 1 and 2 that way by one of my co-midwifery students, and got to study right along with her for a couple of months. And then she left where I was studying, and I was kind of then on my own. A couple years moved into the future. I took my Reiki masters. When looking back, I was like, I needed Reiki sessions. I needed some actual healing work. And instead of like, I just need the Reiki masters. And so looking back, I don't say I regret, but I felt misguided on what I should be doing. I'm just going to mute everyone in the background. If you want to chat with us, feel free to just take yourself off mute if you have a question. But I'm just kind of being aware of the background noise. And so my Reiki Masters was a 3-hour class and attunement. And then my Reiki Master took off and left town and never saw her again, never heard from her again. And I was
good luck. There you go. Now you can heal. Good job.
Yeah, it was pretty what the heck just happened? I was totally out of my body. I had a migraine for 2 days, and it was that was really intense. And now I have no idea what to do. So I kind of have then dedicated my adult Reiki practice. Once I healed from that and actually started learning, I studied a lot on my own. I started picking up manuals where I could. I started really the basis of what I learned was directly from my Reiki guides. They would teach me things like Gashao, and I didn't know what name it was, but then it would come out in the Reiki Max magazine a year later. I was like, oh, I've been doing that for last year. So I did a lot of meditative work and really developed my clairaudience and my clairvoyance so that I could work directly with my Reiki guides. And then when I started seeing clients, they just told me, this is where you need to put your hands. So I just learned how to become a very clear conduit and not get in my own way. And that was awesome. But that's not your typical Reiki training. That's not usually how that works. So I have a very unique path, and I recognize that. And so when I started teaching, I became really committed to my students. I love, love, love teaching. It is absolutely my passion to support Reiki practitioners, especially the ones that didn't get optimal training and they need support. So I love having conversations with Reiki practitioners, with supporting Reiki practitioners, and am hugely committed to Reiki education. And that's why at the ReikiCafe University, we don't just have me. It's I want to bring in Bruce. Sometimes I'll bring in other experts in certain lineages, but for the most part, in any of our ReikiCafe University classes, you're going to get a touch of both Bruce and I. And the reason why we do that is because he is a wealth of knowledge from the Eastern tradition, as well as the Western tradition. And I have my own take and way of doing things from my own practice. And so we get a mix of both worlds, and it's a beautiful collaboration, and I love, love, love it. So
there's a lot of times that people, I hear this quite often, that, first off, Reiki and its practice of connecting to your own energy, the infinite energy within all of us, that doesn't have to have a label or a name. And one thing that we've been discussing both at the Reiki Cafe, and I get this sometimes on the URR page, is that one lineage has to be stronger than another. One attunement is better or worse or whatever. And, you know, all of these paths converge to the same destination at the end of the day. You can call that whatever you wish. And like Christina's saying, I mean, like, you know, for me, the hallmark of the practice is to remove the I, to remove the idea of the ego or the self. And that's not unique to me. Many of you are probably exploring or well understanding the same idea. But Christina's mentioning, like, maybe some people's trainings were, you know, not up to speed or whatever. I've heard many teachers talk about this, like, oh, you've now found the right path, you're in the right lineage of Reiki, it's the most powerful way or whatever. And it's, you know, we want to make sure that, yeah, we're giving both of our perspectives here, because we want to make sure that everybody who is with us is confident and strong on their own path, but also understanding that, you know, we're potentially holding clients in a space of healing where, if that's misguided, by no fault of our own, we can end up doing harm as well. And that's, you know, that's a big conversation to have, but I mean, it's an important one to stay grounded, stay neutral, stay, you know, unbiased, and then just let the energy flow for the greatest good.
Yes, absolutely. And I just want to honor all of you who have come from your own backgrounds and your own training all over the world here today. I see everything from France, Bozeman, Montana, Netherlands, Australia, Ontario, Canada, Colorado Springs, Colorado, Sweden. And on Facebook, we have Germany and Italy and just really everywhere, Alberta, Canada. So, you know, I love this because we really are coming from so many different places, and I love having this collaborative conversation. And so I want everyone to know too that we want you to be included in this conversation. And so if you have questions, please put them in the chat box or in the comments, depending on where you're watching from. I'm watching, if you see me looking down, it's because I'm looking at the Facebook group and making sure if there's any conversations being had there. I'm just kind of tuning in to make sure that everyone who's watching has an equal voice. So thank you all for joining with us today for this conversation. Texas, England, like, yes, everyone here. This is such a diverse group, and I love and honor all of you from your own background. So thank you so much for being here.
And bravo to whoever is from Australia, because it must be like 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. from, I think that's Mari. So can I see where she is? Let's see, Mari.
Yeah, we're kind of a whole mixed bag. Like, it should be probably really early, like 6 a.m., 5 a.m. So thank you. So does anyone have any particular questions right off the bat, or do you guys want us to start just diving in? Like, let us know in the chat box. Feel free to take yourself off of mute if you're on here from watching on the Zoom call. But one of the things that came up recently is I kind of want to have a conversation of where the East and West like lineages came from, because I find this really interesting and a lot of people don't understand. 7 a.m. Hey, that's not so bad. I mean, it's
not
still
so bad. Yeah, that's what I was just laughing at, the quite civilized time. That is indeed quite civilized.
I love that, because I think this is where people just assume that there is only one Reiki, and I'm like, actually, that's Western. There's this thing happening in Japan that still is happening there. And a lot of us who were trained in the Takata lineage really have a disconnect of what's still happening in Japan. So because Bruce, you have been and taught and trained in Japan with the Gokai, can you give us a little background on what like, I want to know Reiki culture shock, like what were the things that really like stood out to you walking into their trainings? And then we can just have a conversation of how we kind of came to today, of how all these different practices showed up.
Yeah, certainly. Just to be clear, I haven't trained with the Gakkai. And the Gakkai is, if that's not a familiar term to you, the Gakkai is it's like the Reiki organization, or for a lack of a better way to put it, it's like the institute that maintains the initial teachings of Usui Sensei. And they publish a little book with the guiding principles and everything of the Gakkai, and it is a private group. There are some Westerners that are involved in that. Justin Stein, who's in the URR group, I think he's the historian for the Gakkai. I'm not a part of it. I've never met anybody in person except for Hakutan Inamoto, who was my most recent teacher, who is also a member of the Gakkai. But what I will say, with what I really appreciated in my time in Kyoto when I was studying Reiki and participating with Komyo Reiki Do and my background on it, was the conversation that came out of it. I really appreciated that a lot of the things that we believe that, or maybe you've been taught in your trainings from your teachers or whatever, a lot of these things are unsubstantiated or they are myths. And so I'll start with the kind of general story of Usui Sensei. Now, we know that Usui Sensei existed, of course. We know the historical context of where he was from and, you know, what his family did and these types of things. Quite often, and if you look at some of your manuals, it might even say that he was a doctor. And there's no actual physical evidence of him being a doctor, at least none that I'm aware of, none that Justin is aware of, and none that Hakutan is aware of. Now, and everything that I say here, let me put that context on it. I'm not saying that it's true or not. I'm just saying that the people who have access to this information aren't seeing any clear evidence of these things. So there's also the story, of course, of him going on to Mount Kurama and fasting for 21 days and then receiving the divine intervention of Chokure, the empowerment symbol from Shodan, from Okudan, the level 2 for Usui Reiki Ryoho. Now, again, is that fact or fiction? We're not really sure. We know that there was somebody named Mikao Usui. Did he spend time meditating and fasting like is purported on Mount Kurama? That's unsubstantiated. And, you know, what I'm saying here might sound negative. It might sound like I'm actually decrying what Reiki talks about. And for me, I actually find a lot of positivity in that. I find a lot of beauty in that. If you think about any of the stories with any major religion, all of these things are unsubstantiated because in my mind, the story is a metaphor for, in reality, what we already have within us, which is Reiki, which is the energy, right? And so, you know, if this is something that somebody had to learn by meditating and fasting for 21 days on Mount Kurama, and then they got divine intervention, well, then that automatically separates Usui Sensei from everybody else. That puts him up higher than all of us. And indeed, Reiki, by its definition, by the term itself, is universal energy. It flows through all living beings. So the fact that these things are kind of unsubstantiated or in many ways myths gives us the idea or kind of the context to step into that space. Just like in Buddhism, that, you know, everybody is the Buddha, or just like in Christianity, it talks quite often about the Christ consciousness within all of us. You know, it's not like there's somebody up on a mountain and we have to just sit there and be completely, you know, on our knees and grovel and hopefully maybe we'll get some sort of enlightenment. This is a path that we can all follow. And I really find a lot of beauty in that. And so, you know, hearing all of these things and discussing the space of Reiki in Kyoto was starting with these things. It was almost like, if this is a myth, if this is a story that is fabricated, I don't mean that in a negative way, but if this is a historical story that exists, and we follow that story to find something deeper about ourselves, a truth that is deeper within ourselves, then therein lies the actual truth, right? And, you know, I find quite often how if you are studying Usui Reiki Ryoho, this is something that I found really beautiful as well. Usui Reiki Ryoho, that translates into the hands-on healing method that was first brought by Mikao Usui. So even his first students were calling it Usui Reiki Ryoho. And I really love that, because they weren't saying something like, oh, now I'm doing this thing, like I have control or ownership over this thing. They were simply saying, we're practicing something that was brought to us by Usui Sensei. And see, that further separates the I from the practice. You know, so when we say we're Reiki masters or whatever, we have to be conscious of, like, well, what is that word? I mean, master is a very loaded term. It's very quick that it can put us above everybody else. And how could we possibly be above everybody else when we're talking about working with the energy that literally creates all living and non-living beings? That separation doesn't make any sense. And I find that that line of thought is so steeped in the Japanese tradition. You know, in Kyoto, this is you got Mount Kurama and then you have Mount Hiei, and on Mount Hiei in particular, two mountains that are, if you've been to Kyoto, you know what I'm talking about, but these are two mountains that are right outside of Kyoto. And so many different lineages of Buddhism have their foundational roots on these mountains, you know, and so it's steeped in Buddhist tradition. And to oversimplify everything, grossly oversimplify everything, I really appreciate that you know, some of the tenets of Buddhism is to just sit and observe, like Zen, for instance. When you just sit in Zazen, you are just sitting in observation of whatever may come. And when you practice Usui Reiki Ryoho, or when you are diving into that space, you're simply observing the connection to that energy. You're simply allowing it to exist. You're not worried about sending it somewhere or healing people or the response, the feedback that comes, because all of that gives space for the eye. You're simply holding space. Now, from some of the records from the Gakkai, they're talking that Usui Sensei would sit with the initial students, and if they were spiritually, or I guess I could say maybe emotionally adept enough where they could sit and hold space, then their Reiki practice was quite simply just sitting. There's no need for the hands, there's no need for the symbols, there's no need for the mantras, because if you can separate fully, then you just are Reiki. You just are the flow of Reiki. So then the discussion very quickly became like, well, then why do we use the symbols? Why do we have the precepts? Why do we chant the precepts in Japanese, maybe, for instance? Or why do we do, you know, the meditations, you know, like Joshin Kyoku Ho or Shishin Tyotsu or whatever? Why are we doing these things? And that's because we are simply trying to get the body and the mind into a state of equilibrium and balance. So there's neutrality, so the energy flows. And the last thing that I want to say, what I really appreciated and when I was working with Hakutan at the Reiki gatherings on the Monday evening Reiki gatherings in Kyoto, everybody in the audience, or the, you know, like if we were all there, for instance, we would sit and everybody receives Reiju, the attunement. And, you know, from a Western perspective, it's almost like, oh, you've got your Okudan attunement, so now you're at level 2, and that's it. It's one and done. But in Japan, you do attunements all the time, like every day if you want to. And here's what I really loved about it. We would sit in Gasha, and we would sit in that space and just sit with our eyes closed. And the Shihans, the teachers for Komyo Reikido, would be, a group of them anyways, would be in the front of the room. All of our eyes are closed, so we have no idea who is giving us the attunement. And that's specifically to pull out the idea that's like, let's assume all of us here are Reiki masters, right? And we have a whole crowd of people. Now, because Christine and I are leading this talk, the crowd of people might be like, oh my God, I really want an attunement from Bruce and Christine, because that's going to be so much more powerful. That's completely ridiculous. You know, it doesn't make any sense. And it's just more space for the ego to come into that place. So all of that diving into it. And then of course, this would be another conversation, but like the symbolism in the symbols, like Seihiki, for instance, is you know, you can see, if you go to Mount Kurama, you can see Seihiki and all of the symbols of the temples, even though they have nothing to do with Buddhism, because they're talking about the Bodhisattva of the natural world and the connection to the flow. And of course, Seihiki means balance, and like the natural world is in balance. So there's all of this steeped mysticism and meaning behind it, which I find really, really beautiful and really fascinating.
Yeah. I think what I love about this conversation is it really helps us look at the hierarchy of Reiki and how it's come in the West of like, my Reiki is better than your Reiki. We've had quite a few of those conversations in the Reiki Cafe community recently. And I love that point. Like, there in Japan, you're amongst a crowd and you don't know who's giving you your attunement. Whoever is doing it, they're just the open channel for Reiki at that moment for you. It's about the spirit connection and not the name of the person tied to it. And so I just find that absolutely beautiful. And I see. Well, and I feel like, and it just goes to show like ego comes into play so often, especially in Western culture in particular, because, and that's where the master term came from. It wasn't something that was Shimpaitan was Shimpaitan. It's not, I'm assuming it doesn't translate directly to master. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and I see this all the time, and I have to talk to my students, especially my Reiki students, about just because you're a master, like this is the title, doesn't mean that it's an appropriate title. It's just the one that's recognized in the States.
And going even further to that, like for Shinpin, the master level of Usui Reiki Ryoho, that wasn't initial, as far as records are showing, that didn't even initially exist. So this was 2 or 3 teachers post Mikao Usui who then came up with the Shinpin level. So, you know, this is another, that's a whole nother discussion to be having though.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like, and I've always was curious because I hear one thing and then I hear something else, and it's like I constantly now I'm like either asking Bruce or want to go run into Justin Stein and be like, is this even close to accurate? Like, where did this come from? Because I'm a huge believer and I want to know the history. I want to know why I came to this point in this time. And um, we have to look at it from different perspectives. So it's like, even if one Reiki master wrote a book on the Reiki history, we should be looking at multiple different perspectives to make sure that we have a clear understanding. It's not just from one vantage point. And I think that's why, you know, the Reiki community in general has been so blessed by Justin Stein stepping forward and really doing the research and on the history. Like, that's huge. I'd love to have him on one of these days for sure.
Let me
But
say something to that really quickly. That's, you know, because all of you here might have different backgrounds. And when I was working at the Vitality Center, you know, and working alongside very, very well-known Chinese medicine doctors, it was really interesting to hear their take on the movement of qi. See, like in China and in Japan and in the East and stuff, like illnesses are understood to be just a stagnation of qi. So for me to go to a place like the Vitality Center, and when I did my interview, to be there, I was the only Reiki practitioner that they've had, and to get that position, um, they were very quickly like, okay, so you're, we don't know what Reiki is. It's a Japanese thing, right? And so they had no idea. And I was like, yeah, it's moving chi through the body and it's helping to whatever. So we dived into it like that. And then all of a sudden it was clicking like, oh, okay, so if you can do that, then work with the clients. You know, how does that chi move? What do you know about these things? And why I'm bringing all this up is because what Christine was saying, like, not only is there different lineages within Reiki, but if we can start to see that Tai Chi and Qigong and acupuncture and Kung Fu and meditation and breath work and all these other things that are also working on the inner systems of the body to move chi through the body, then we're also performing a similar version of healing. It doesn't matter what you call it, we're just moving chi through the body. So I'm saying that here, not we're all Reiki practitioners or at least have an interest in Reiki, but you might have a side interest in Tai Chi or yoga or whatever, and realize that those are connected. They're not separate entities, right? And even with Reiki itself, we trace Reiki back to Japan, but that's not where hands-on healing with the movement of energy was first being discussed. There's evidence of this 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, coming out of the yogis in the Himalayas and in India. 2,000 or 3,000 years might be an exaggeration. I don't know the exact date, but well before Mikao Usui's time anyways. So it's like, well, so if he didn't create it, then who did? Well, that's an irrelevant statement. You know, we don't have to get lost in that nuance. So I'm only saying all that because wherever your diverse backgrounds are also coming from, like I teach meditation and breath work and yoga and everything else. When I teach all of that for my clients and everything, it's all interwoven because it's the same story, just in a different context.
exactly. It's like talking about chakras. Well, the Incas and the Mayans understood chakras too. It's just called a different name. And so we have a lot of these different healing modalities all over the world, but our goal is typically the same place of coming into balance, body, mind, and spirit, and to be able to connect to our inner source wisdom and an external source wisdom. And so this Reiki is just a beautiful way to heal our stagnant chi, not chai. I love chai, but not what I mean. And just really help bring in this balance, because I feel like when we can heal ourselves, then we can overflow in abundance to others. When we heal ourselves, we're healing a collective history of memories that are causing us to struggle as a society. So always coming back to an internal source of healing first, so that then we can see clients. And when we see clients, we're not letting our ego or our I self get in the way of the client, and we want to, or getting in the way of the flow of the chi to the client. We've got some conversations going on in the Facebook chat, which I'm appreciative. So Jen says, I completely agree on the fact that some Western side, especially some people, just use the term master to feed their low tendencies or thinking to have something more than others, instead of just something, a title and a level who can attune someone else. But it's not about the Reiki, since someone on the first level can have more healing skills and awareness than a master. Yeah, it's very interesting how the term master got used. And I always go back to Takata needed a title to be respected as a Japanese American, and I think that's really when it started coming and calling herself a grandmaster. I'm not only a master, I'm the grandmaster. Like, that was not a term used. But when we can see going, oh, I can put myself in her shoes and go, I can see why she did that, being a Japanese American living in Hawaii post World War II, and not even starting to teach until 1970, when she got trained in the early 1940s. So I find all of these pieces of information, when I can understand and respect where the history is coming from, I can look at my own practice and go, how do I want to move forward? How do I want to teach? How do I want to move the lineage forward in a healthy way? And for me, like, I don't know what my lineage is. Like, I wasn't taught that. My class was literally 3 hours. I ended up getting a reattunement in 2010, just so I'd be like, okay, so how do you do that Reiki attunement thing again? Like, I can't pick it up from these books. I want to see it. And so, but for the most part, it was like, I took this puzzle pieces and I put them all together and kind of figured it out for myself. But I've always been open to learning. I've always been open and seeking other Reiki masters, other teachers. And we started the ReikiCafe Community Facebook group back in 2016, just to have a safe container for what originally was like, here's for my students. Like, I can then teach them and we can collaborate. And then more and more students and Reiki masters came into that space. And it is meant to be a collaborative, supportive community where we're not judging one another for different titles and different backgrounds and lineages, where there's respect going, no matter where you're coming from, you're here to learn, and that's okay, and embraced that you're seeking. And so I'm so appreciative of everyone here who's still seeking, even if you have the title master behind your name.
One thing, Christine, before you come on to the next question, that I was seeing firsthand and many of you are Reiki masters, maybe a lot of you are practitioners, maybe a lot of you see clients. So I want to suggest something that might sound a little bit controversial at first, but just hear me out where I'm going on this. So where I was working previously, the Vitality Center, this was a proper medical clinic, right? So it wasn't like a holistic center or whatever. I mean, people were coming in it was a holistic health center, but it was treated in China as a medical clinic. So there's proper doctors work from a Western perspective, proper doctors working there and things. And what I would suggest is that when people came to me to see me for Reiki, and the Chinese medicine doctors would say things like, oh yeah, he's got all this energy, he can do this, he can do that, or whatever. They're creating a space where that individual can feel more comfortable about that experience. Okay. So when you hear something, like if you are a Reiki master, you might have somebody who is coming into your clinic or to come and see you as a client who is really skeptical of Reiki, who is really skeptical of energy, they don't believe in it at all or whatever. And they might need to find comfort in your lineage or your title or these grandiose statements or whatever. Because at the end of the day, That's the exact same thing as like the trust that we put into doctors, right? We put trust into titles all the time. Oh my God, you're a PhD. Wow. Okay. Well, whatever you say now, I'm going to believe. But there's power in that space, right? Because Reiki, what Reiki is doing from a Eastern perspective, all Reiki is an internal discussion. There's no external. So like the internal then becomes, or sorry, the external world becomes reflective of my internal environment. It's not the other way around. So when I have a session with somebody, I'm holding space to calm my internal environment. So in a way, what I'm trying to do is cultivate a space that the client can also calm and quiet their internal environment, so a deeper truth about their own suffering can manifest itself. And what I want to suggest, and why I'm saying this might sound a little bit controversial, is maybe for some people, they need to see these titles, they need to see these things to just be like, oh my God, I've heard about you. You're the guy that studied in Japan. Wow, that's okay. I'm in really good hands. Really, what they're really saying is, I trust you enough. I'm going to let go that much further, and something deeper is then going to come out. And there's no doubt about that. That's a very serious and very honorable space to hold in many ways. Because if you can't create that space or that framework around a session, then people with a lot of resistance might not get anything out of it.